There's a strange point where money stops depending on you and starts depending on itself. Imagine two people. One works harder. One earns less. Yet after 20 years, the second person's wealth begins growing faster than the first. Not slightly faster. Noticeably, undeniably faster, in a way that makes no sense if you believe effort is what builds wealth. Why? Because money follows different rules once it reaches a certain size. Rules that have nothing to do with how many hours you worked or how many raises you earned or how disciplined you were with a spreadsheet. Most people never reach that point. Not because they're lazy. Not because they lack intelligence or income or opportunity. Because nobody ever tells them the point exists. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that point looks like. You'll understand why almost everyone quits before reaching it. And you'll understand why the biggest mistake was never earning too little. It was stopping too soon. Let's start somewhere unexpected. Imagine pushing a heavy boulder across flat ground. For the first stretch, nothing happens. You push. You strain. The boulder barely shifts. Every muscle in your body says this isn't working. And then, without warning, something changes. The boulder starts rolling on its own. You're no longer pushing. You're steering. That's not a metaphor for effort. It's a metaphor for money. Here's the part almost nobody notices when they begin. The first years of building wealth are supposed to feel pointless. Not because you're doing anything wrong. Because of how your brain is built. Your mind understands linear things. Walk for an hour, cover roughly the same distance you covered the hour before. Study for a week, remember roughly the same amount you remembered the week before. Everything around you, your entire life, has trained your brain to expect steady, proportional progress. Effort in, result out, in a straight line you can practically draw with a ruler. Money doesn't behave like that. Not at the start. There's an old story about a farmer given a strange choice. Take a small fortune of gold today, or take a single grain of rice doubled every day for 30 days. Almost everyone chooses the gold. The rice sounds like nothing. 1 grain, 2 grains. For most of the month, the pile barely fills a spoon. Anyone watching would assume the farmer chose wrong. And then, somewhere near the final days, the pile stops looking like rice and starts looking like a mountain, growing faster in the last few days than in the previous 3 weeks combined. That's the part almost nobody sees coming. Growth that looks invisible for a long stretch, and then suddenly doesn't. Bamboo does something similar. Plant it, water it, and for years nothing seems to happen above the surface. No stalk, no height, just soil that looks exactly the same as the day you planted it. Anyone would assume it died or never grew or was a waste of effort. But underneath that motionless soil, something else is happening. Roots are spreading, quietly, in every direction, building a structure invisible to anyone standing above ground. And then, once that structure is ready, the bamboo shoots upward, sometimes several feet in a single week, as if it appeared out of nowhere. It didn't appear out of nowhere. It had been building the entire time. You just couldn't see it. This is exactly what happens with money, and almost nobody warns you about it. In the beginning, your capital is small, painfully small. If you're contributing $400 a month, and your investments grow by $20 that month, the growth barely registers. There's a rounding error next to your own effort. Your brain looks at that number and quietly concludes this isn't working. This will never be enough. I should be doing something else with my time. That conclusion feels reasonable. It's also completely wrong. Because during that invisible stretch, something is happening underneath the surface, the same way it was happening underneath the bamboo. Your money isn't just sitting there. It's starting to earn. And what it earns starts earning too. Slowly. Quietly, in amounts too small to notice, buried inside numbers that look almost identical from one month to the next. Have you ever felt this? Doing everything right, saving, investing, avoiding debt, and still checking your account every few weeks, wondering if any of it is actually working, or if you're simply feeding a boulder that refuses to move. That feeling isn't a warning sign. It's a stage. Every single wealth story that ends in acceleration begins with this exact same silence. The people who eventually reach the turning point are not the ones who found some clever trick to skip this stretch. They're the ones who kept feeding the boulder, kept watering soil that showed no visible sign of life, through years that felt, from the inside, indistinguishable from failure. Because somewhere ahead, without a single dramatic announcement, the pattern breaks. And once it breaks, nothing about the story moves at the same speed again. Think about what actually separates the person who reaches that break from the person who doesn't. It's rarely income. Plenty of high earners never get there because high earners often spend at the same speed they earn, leaving nothing behind to quietly grow. And it's rarely intelligence either. You don't need to understand markets or read financial reports or predict anything correctly. You simply need to keep placing grains on the board, keep watering soil that shows nothing, long after it stops feeling reasonable to continue. That's a strange kind of skill. It isn't taught in school because it doesn't look like a skill while you're using it. From the outside, it looks like nothing at all. It looks like a person doing the same unremarkable thing, month after month, with no visible reward to show for it. Nobody applauds a person for depositing the same amount into an account for the 40th consecutive month. There's no ceremony for staying boring. And yet, that's precisely the ingredient every version of this story shares. Not a clever entry point, not a lucky pick, just enough patience to survive a stretch of time where the results refuse to show themselves, because they're too busy accumulating somewhere underground, out of view, waiting for a moment nobody can predict in advance. So if patience is the ingredient, what exactly is it building toward? What actually changes underneath the surface while nothing seems to be happening above it? Here's where it helps to trace the path money actually takes, from the moment you earn it to the moment it starts behaving differently. It begins as salary, a number that arrives because you traded hours or skill or both for it. Salary becomes savings, the portion you don't spend, the part you set aside instead of letting it disappear into rent, groceries, subscriptions, the 1,000 small exits every paycheck faces. Savings becomes capital, money that's no longer just sitting in an account, but placed somewhere it can grow. And capital, given enough time, starts producing something new. Returns. For a long stretch, those returns stay small, quiet, easy to dismiss. But eventually, something strange begins to happen. The returns themselves start producing returns. Not just capital growing. Growth growing. This is the part where effort slowly loses control. Think about what that actually means. In the beginning, every dollar of growth traces back to you. Your labor, your discipline, your decision to set money aside instead of spending it. You are, in every sense, the engine. But somewhere along this path, a second engine quietly switches on, one that doesn't need your labor at all. It runs on the capital you've already built, working while you sleep, while you're at your job doing something completely unrelated to money, while you're on vacation not thinking about any of this. Two engines running side by side. Yours and the one your money built for itself. For a while, your engine is doing almost all the work. The second one barely contributes anything worth noticing. And then, gradually, the balance starts shifting. Not because your engine got weaker, because the other one got stronger. Eventually, without any single dramatic crossover moment, money starts producing more than labor does. That sentence deserves a pause. Money starts producing more than labor, more than your job, more than your raises, more than your side project or your extra hours or your discipline with a budget spreadsheet. The engine you didn't have to push anymore had quietly become the larger one. This is the strange point. It isn't a fixed dollar amount, the same for everyone, waiting to be crossed like a finish line. It depends on how much you're saving, what returns your capital is earning, how large your expenses have grown, and how much of your lifestyle is still tied to your own ongoing effort. Two people with identical incomes can reach this point years apart, simply because one of them let their spending grow every time their salary did, while the other kept the gap between earning and spending wide enough for capital to actually accumulate. Picture it as a graph with two lines. One line represents the money you're contributing yourself month after month, year after year. The other represents the money your capital is generating on its own. At the start, your line sits far above the other one. Your contributions dwarf your returns. The gap feels enormous, almost embarrassing, when you calculate it honestly. But your line grows in a straight path, roughly steady, tied to your income. The other line doesn't move in a straight path. It bends. Slowly at first, so slowly it's easy to ignore, and then less slowly, and then eventually sharply. Somewhere on that graph, the two lines cross. Before the crossing, you are the engine. After the crossing, your capital is. That crossing point is what we've been calling the threshold, and it deserves a different kind of attention than most financial concepts get, because it isn't really about money at all. It's about who's driving. Before the threshold, every year of progress depends on you showing up, contributing, resisting the temptation to spend, staying consistent through years that offer no evidence anything is working. After the threshold, progress starts happening with or without you. Your money keeps compounding whether you check the account or not, whether you add another dollar or not, whether you're paying attention or living your life completely distracted by something else entirely. That's the shift nobody explains clearly. It isn't a number you hit. It's a role you stop playing. And here's the part that should genuinely reframe how you think about the years before it. Every dollar you contribute before the threshold isn't just building your balance. It's recruiting future soldiers, dollars that will eventually fight this battle without needing you to send them into it. The $400 you set aside this month isn't only worth $400. It's worth whatever that dollar and everything it eventually earns, and everything that earning eventually earns, will be worth decades from now, long after you've stopped thinking about it entirely. Most people never picture it that way. They see a static number, deposited, sitting, waiting. What they're actually doing is enlisting capital into a system that will keep working on their behalf long after the initial effort is forgotten. So the real question isn't when will I get rich? It's when does my money start working harder than I do? And once you can answer that question honestly, for your own numbers, your own savings rate, your own returns, you'll understand exactly how far you are from the point where effort finally hands the wheel to something else. There's a reason this matters more than most financial advice ever admits. Almost everything you'll hear about money focuses on the first engine. Earn more, work harder, negotiate a raise, pick up another project. All useful, all reasonable, and all ultimately limited because the first engine has a ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day, only so many years in a career, only so much a single person can produce with their own two hands before exhaustion sets a hard limit on the whole equation. The second engine has no such ceiling. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't need sleep or a vacation or a raise to keep functioning. It simply keeps compounding at whatever rate the capital underneath it allows, for as long as it's left alone to do its work. That's the real reason this threshold matters so much. It isn't just a milestone. It's the moment your financial life stops being bound by your own physical limits and starts being bound by something with no ceiling at all. Let's make this concrete. 3 people. Same starting age. Same principle underneath all of it. Very different outcomes. Ali earns a solid income and saves consistently, roughly the same percentage every single month, regardless of what's happening around him. He doesn't chase anything. He doesn't panic during downturns. He simply keeps feeding the same boulder year after year, through periods that feel exciting and periods that feel like absolutely nothing is happening. By the time 2 decades pass, Ali has crossed the threshold without ever noticing the exact month it happened. His capital quietly became the larger engine sometime around year 14 or 15, and by year 20, it's producing more in a single year than his salary does. Sarah earns more than Ali, meaningfully more, but every time her income rises, her lifestyle rises with it. A larger apartment, a newer car, better vacations. Nothing reckless, nothing anyone would call irresponsible. Just the quiet, familiar pattern of letting expenses expand to match earnings. Sarah saves, but the gap between what she earns and what she spends never widens the way Ali's does. 20 years later, Sarah has built comfort. She has not built momentum. Her capital never grew large enough, relative to her expenses, to become the second engine. She's still, in every meaningful sense, the one pushing. Daniel starts strong, disciplined, consistent, doing everything right for the first several years. But somewhere around year 4, the market drops sharply, and the numbers on his screen turn red for months at a time. Daniel panics. He pulls a significant portion of his capital out, telling himself he'll reinvest once things settle down. Things do settle down eventually, but Daniel doesn't reinvest. He waits for a better moment that never quite arrives, and years later, He restarts with a fraction of what he would have had if he'd simply stayed still. His capital, that would have been quietly compounding underneath the surface for 2 decades, effectively resets and starts the invisible stretch all over again. Same starting point, same principle. 3 completely different distances from the threshold 20 years later. Notice what actually separated them. It wasn't intelligence. Sarah is arguably the sharpest of the 3, the one who reads the most about markets, who understands returns and portfolios better than either of the others. It wasn't income either. Sarah out-earned Ali every single year. What separated them was behavior, sustained over decades, in ways too small to notice in any single month, but impossible to ignore when you compare the outcomes side by side. This is the part almost nobody wants to hear, because it removes the excuses that feel comfortable. It's rarely the market's fault. It's rarely a lack of opportunity or bad luck or timing. The gap between people who reach the threshold and people who don't usually comes down to a small number of repeated behaviors. Lifestyle rising every time income does, quietly erasing the gap that capital needs to grow. Panic during downturns, converting temporary paper losses into permanent, real ones. Impatience, abandoning a plan simply because the results haven't shown up yet, without realizing results were never supposed to show up this early. Stopping contributions during difficult months, treating consistency as optional instead of essential. Debt that grows alongside savings, quietly canceling out the very capital being built. Constant upgrades, one purchase at a time, none of them catastrophic alone, all of them catastrophic together. Comparison, watching someone else's faster-looking progress and abandoning a sound plan to chase it. None of these require bad intentions. Most people who make these choices are trying their best, reacting reasonably to what feels in the moment like sensible behavior. That's what makes this so difficult. The choices that quietly prevent someone from ever reaching the threshold rarely feel like mistakes while they're being made. They feel like ordinary life, which means reaching the threshold was never really about finding the right investment, or timing the market correctly, or discovering some secret formula nobody else knows. It was about surviving your own instincts long enough for a slow, invisible process to finish what it started. So here's the perspective worth carrying forward. The strange point we've been circling this entire time isn't when someone becomes rich. It's when their effort stops being the engine. Up until then, you're carrying your money. Every dollar depends on you showing up, contributing, resisting the pull to spend, staying consistent through years offering no visible proof anything is working. After that, your money begins carrying itself. It keeps compounding whether you're watching or not, whether you add another dollar or not, whether you're thinking about any of this at all. And once that happens, every year starts looking very different from the one before it. Not because anything dramatic occurs, because the engine quietly changed hands sometime during a year that felt, at the time, completely unremarkable. That's the part worth remembering the next time progress feels invisible. You're not failing. You're not behind. You're simply somewhere on a curve that doesn't reveal its shape until you've already traveled most of the distance. The only real risk was ever stopping too soon, mistaking a quiet stretch for an empty one, and walking away exactly before the story was about to change. Think about Ali one more time, 20 years in, looking back at those early statements that once felt so discouraging. The numbers from year 2 look almost embarrassing next to where he stands now, not because he did anything differently in year 2 than Sarah or Daniel did, but because he simply let those small, unremarkable numbers keep compounding, undisturbed, for 2 full decades. He never needed a breakthrough. He never needed a lucky year. He needed the absence of interruption, which turned out to be far rarer and far more valuable than anyone had told him going in. That's the real difference between the 3 of them when you strip everything else away. Not talent, not opportunity, not even luck in any meaningful sense. Just distance traveled without turning back, through a stretch of time that asked for nothing more than continued belief in something that refused to prove itself early. And that's ultimately what this entire idea comes down to. The threshold was never hiding behind a secret strategy. It was waiting on the other side of years that felt like nothing, for anyone patient enough to keep walking through them.